I still remember the first time I felt it, the shift in the air, the unspoken tension that crept up my spine like a slow-moving shadow. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, like a whisper in a crowded room. But once I noticed, I couldn't unsee it. Adeel had always been the polite, well-mannered nephew, the one who cracked jokes at family gatherings, the one my husband treated like a younger brother. He had a way of making people feel comfortable, an easy charm that fooled everyone, even me. But then there were those moments. The first time I brushed it off. Maybe I imagined it. I had been setting the table for dinner, surrounded by the chatter of my in-laws, when I felt it, a gaze heavy and deliberate. I turned my head, and there he was, across the room, watching me. He didn't look away immediately. His lips curled up slightly, as if he knew something I didn't. I shook it off, forcing myself to smile. It was nothing, just a look. Then came the little accidents. One evening I was making tea in the kitchen when Adeel walked in, too close. The air between us felt different, thick, charged. He reached for a cup just as I turned, his hand brushing against mine, longer than it should have. "Sorry, Barbie," he murmured, his voice lower than usual. I laughed awkwardly, telling myself I was overreacting, but deep inside a quiet voice whispered, "That wasn't an accident. It happened again, and again." A lingering touch on my wrist when he passed me the remote, a hand resting on the small of my back when he squeezed past me in a doorway. His eyes, always on me when he thought no one was looking. I told myself I was imagining things until the night of the family gathering. The house was full of guests, laughter bouncing off the walls. My husband was busy entertaining his cousins, and I was in the kitchen refilling trays. I didn't hear Adeel come in, but I felt him. I turned, and there he was, standing much too close. "Let me help," he said, his voice soft, almost amused. "I'm fine," I replied, my fingers tightening around the tray. He didn't move. For a moment there was nothing but silence between us, a charged, suffocating silence. Then he reached out and brushed a stray hair from my face. A cold wave of fear crashed over me. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. He smiled. Not a warm, friendly smile, the kind he wore in front of others. This one was different, knowing, like he was testing how far he could go. I walked out of the kitchen, my heart pounding. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't in my head, and it was only going to get worse. Section 2. The warning signs turn into fear. After that night in the kitchen, something changed. It was no longer subtle glances or accidental touches. Adeel was bolder now, more deliberate, like he had crossed a line in his mind and decided he wasn't stepping back. At first I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was giving meaning to things that didn't mean anything, but deep down I knew. And the more I ignored it, the worse it got. One afternoon I was passing through the hallway when I felt it again, that eerie sensation of being watched. I turned, and there he was, standing at the other end of the corridor, just looking at me. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. My heart thudded in my chest. I swallowed and forced myself to walk past him, acting as if I hadn't noticed. But just as I reached him, he shifted, blocking my way. "Adeel," I said, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. "Move." He didn't. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his voice low. "You're different from other women in the family. You know that, right?" A cold shiver ran down my arms. His words were casual, but the way he said them, the way his eyes held mine, it wasn't a compliment. It was something else. I forced a chuckle. "Stop joking, Adeel. Move aside." He smiled, like he knew I was scared but wouldn't admit it. Then, after a few seconds that felt like hours, he stepped back, letting me pass. I rushed to my room, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking. I felt stupid. Was I really this afraid of a man who hadn't even done anything outright? But it wasn't about what he did. It was about what he could do. That night, when my husband came home, I told him I expected him to be angry, to take my side, to see the fear in my eyes and do something. But instead he laughed. "Adeel? Come on, he's just being friendly, you're taking it the wrong way." I stared at him, disbelief and hurt swirling in my chest. Did he really not see it? Or did he just not want to? After that, I stopped trying to convince him. I was alone in this. I started avoiding Adeel, keeping my distance, making sure I was never alone with him. But it didn't matter. He always found a way. And then, one evening, it happened. I was home alone, reading in my bedroom, when I heard it. Footsteps outside my door. My stomach twisted. The front door was locked. I was sure of it. I held my breath, listening. Another step, then another. Someone was inside. And I wasn't alone anymore. The night was quiet, too quiet. I had been alone for hours, my husband away on a business trip, leaving me with nothing but my own thoughts and the lingering unease that never seemed to fade. I had double-checked the locks, closed all the windows, and even left a small light on in the hallway, but still something felt off. Then came the knock. Soft at first, almost hesitant. I froze, my fingers gripping the edge of my book. Who would come at this hour? Another knock, this time firmer. I took slow steps toward the door, peeking through the peephole, and my stomach dropped. Adeel. I hesitated, hoping he would just go away. But then his voice came, muffled but clear. "Barbie, I just need to pick up something for Chachu. He told me it's in the study." A lie. My husband never mentioned anything about Adeel coming over, and even if he did, why now? Why, when I was alone? I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. "Come tomorrow," I called out, keeping my voice firm. "It's late." Silence. For a second I thought he had left, but then the doorknob twisted. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. "Adeel, go home." The knob rattled harder this time. Then the door burst open. I gasped, stumbling back as he stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. "What the hell are you doing?" My voice trembled, but I stood my ground. Adeel didn't answer. Instead, he smiled, that same knowing, taunting smile that had haunted me for weeks. "I told you, Barbie," he murmured, stepping closer. "I just came to pick up something." I could see it in his eyes now. The shift, the darkness, the intent. Panic surged through me. I had to get away. I moved fast, trying to dart past him, but he caught my wrist, his grip tightening like a vice. "Let go, Adeel!" I yelled, struggling against him. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. He chuckled, leaning in slightly. "Why are you always running from me?" Disgust and terror twisted inside me. I yanked my hand free with all my strength, stumbling back. My only escape was my bedroom. I ran. Footsteps thundered behind me. I barely made it inside before slamming the door and locking it. My hands shook as I pressed my weight against the wood, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. Silence. Then a slow, deliberate knock. Tap, tap, tap. Adeel's voice, almost amused. "You can't stay in there forever." Tears burned my eyes. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling to dial. Dead. Another knock, louder this time, and then a whisper, chilling and final. "I'll see you soon, Barbie." And just like that, the footsteps retreated. But the fear stayed. Silence. For minutes, maybe hours, I stayed pressed against the door, listening, barely breathing. My body trembled, my ears strained for the slightest sound. Was he still there? Watching? Waiting? Then the front door creaked open, a pause, and then it shut. He was gone. I collapsed onto the floor, my legs too weak to hold me. Tears welled in my eyes but refused to fall. My hands still tingled where he had grabbed me, his touch burning like poison. I needed to call someone, my husband, the police, someone. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling against the screen. Dead. A strangled sob escaped my throat. Of course my battery had to die tonight. I curled up on the floor, hugging my knees to my chest, trying to slow my breathing. The walls of my own home felt foreign now, like I didn't belong here anymore. I don't know when I drifted into a restless sleep, but I woke up to the sound of the main door unlocking. My husband was home. I shot up, my body still shaking as I ran to him. He barely had time to shut the door before I grabbed his arm. "Adeel, he was here!" I blurted out, my voice cracked, raw from fear. "He broke in, he grabbed me, he wouldn't leave." I expected anger, fury, a protective instinct to take over, but instead, his brows furrowed in disbelief. "What? That's not possible. Adeel wouldn't do that." The room spun. I stared at him, waiting, praying for him to say something else, anything else, but he just stood there, doubting me. "He was here," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "He forced his way in." My husband exhaled, rubbing his temple like I was exhausting him. "Look, maybe you misunderstood. Maybe he..." I took a step back, a different kind of cold creeping into my bones. "Misunderstood?" My voice wavered between heartbreak and rage. "You think I imagined his hands on me? His voice through the door? Do you think I made that up?" He sighed. "I'm just saying, maybe it wasn't that serious." Not that serious. I felt like I had been punched. I had spent the night shaking, terrified in my own home, and the one person who was supposed to protect me, the one person I had trusted with my life, was brushing it off like it was nothing. Something inside me broke. The fear, the helplessness, the self-doubt, it all burned away, leaving behind only one thing: clarity. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and I knew. This night didn't just change the way I saw Adeel, it changed the way I saw my marriage, and I knew, without a doubt, I could never stay, not with a man who wouldn't protect me, not anymore.